There is within you now, at this very moment, a version of yourself that bows to fear, submits to delay, clings to excuses, and seeks comfort over greatness. That version, though familiar, is not the truth of you. It is merely a shadow formed by the false ideas you have accepted about yourself. It is not who you are, but who you have believed yourself to be. To rise, you must first destroy, not by force of hand or might of speech, but by a quiet and determined shift within. The weak version of you must die, not in sorrow or struggle, but in silence, by your refusal to acknowledge it as your identity any longer. You have given this lesser self breath through your acceptance. You have clothed it with words like, "I can't, I'm not ready, what if I fail?" You nurtured it every time you imagined the worst, doubted your own power, or waited for permission to be who you truly are. But now, in this moment, a choice presents itself, to either continue living from that feeble image or to awaken as the version of you that has always existed beyond fear, lack, and limitation. See clearly that the weak self is only a result of a persistent assumption. It is not your destiny, it is your decision. You wore that old garment of limitation for so long, you thought it was your skin. But it is not. It was never yours to begin with. You must undress the lie and clothe yourself in a new assumption, one that is bold, fearless, alive with conviction. Begin now by refusing to think in terms of defeat. Speak not as the broken, act not as the hesitant. Walk into the reality where you already are, who you desire to be. Do not wait for evidence. Let your inner knowing be the proof. Let your imagination create the conditions that your senses will later confirm. If you want to change your world, you must first change your inner self-concept. Kill the version of you that seeks validation, applause, and safety. That self is already buried in the past if you stop resurrecting it with your thought. Assume the identity of the version that does, not someday, not when the timing feels right, but now. The moment you dare to assume it, live it, feel it, you have slain the old self. The battle is not with the world, not with time, not with circumstances. It is within your own awareness. When you think a thought, that thought thinks itself into the world through you. So be ruthless with what you allow to live in the garden of your mind. Do not water the weeds of self-doubt. Do not entertain the voice that says, "Not yet." That voice belongs to the version that must perish for the true self to rise. Each day you stand at a crossroads. Either repeat the memory of limitation or rewrite your identity in power. You do not need to struggle. You only need to stop feeding the weak self. Starve it by refusing to identify with its narrative. Feed only that which reflects your highest vision. The stronger version of you is not something you must become. It is something you must remember. It is buried beneath layers of belief, not reality. And the moment you claim it, not as a future, but as a present fact, you resurrect it. And in that resurrection, the weaker version dies, quietly, without need for battle, because it was never real to begin with. So stand firm in your inner conviction. Live as though you are already the one you have longed to be. Let the feelings of that version flood you. Let its voice speak through your actions. Let its world form around your being. And know, what you accept as true of yourself is what the world will reflect without fail. Kill the weak version by no longer recognizing it. Then you will see there is nothing to overcome, only something to become aware of. And that awareness sustained is your transformation. You have lived for so long under the mask of a lesser identity that you have begun to think it is who you truly are. But the truth is, that weak version of you, the one who hesitates, fears rejection, chooses comfort over calling, is not the essence of your being. It is not the divine self, the creative self, the powerful I am that speaks within you before the world has a chance to interfere. That weak self is a garment you wore, not the body beneath it. You accepted it not because it was true, but because it was offered by others, mirrored by circumstances, or whispered by your own imagination when you had forgotten your power. You were not born into limitation. You were taught it. You were not created to struggle. You were persuaded that struggle is noble, and so you took on the thoughts of lack, dressed in the emotions of fear, and made a home in the house of doubt. But none of it was yours. These were impressions placed upon the canvas of your consciousness, and like a painting, you can wipe them clean and start anew. The weak self is not an enemy. It is a memory, a collection of assumptions you forgot to challenge. It lives only because you visit it in thought, speak as it would speak, and feel as it would feel. You resurrect it with every act of delay, every moment of shrinking back, every time you say, "I'm not ready." But who told you that readiness was a condition placed upon the soul? Who measured your worth and found it incomplete? The answer lies not outside you, but in your own willingness to believe what is false. You are not weak. You have merely identified yourself as such, and identification is the root of all manifestation. Whatever you accept as true of yourself, the world will mirror, not because the world has power over you, but because it reflects the picture you hold within. So long as you continue to see yourself as unworthy, the world will return the echo of that lie. But the moment you stand still and say, "This is not who I am," the world will begin to reform around that declaration. No man or woman was ever born broken. The idea of weakness is an illusion sustained by repetition. You saw it in others, you saw it in your past, and you decided it belonged to you. But decision is a creative act, and what is created can be uncreated by the same power that made it. Assumption. You assumed yourself into this smaller version. You can assume yourself out of it. You must become ruthless with what you claim about yourself. You must stop saying, even silently, what you no longer wish to be. Stop giving voice to the fiction. The moment you say, "I am tired," you give birth to more weariness. The moment you say, "I'm just not good enough," you anchor that lie into the substance of your reality. But if instead you say nothing of the weak self, if you let it die by absence, then what remains is your true essence, waiting to take its place as the only identity worth claiming. There is nothing outside of you keeping you small. There is no force conspiring against your greatness. The only force is attention. The question is, where have you placed it? Upon the memory of weakness or upon the vision of power? For where your attention dwells, there your identity forms, and where your identity forms, your life follows. You are not required to heal the weak self. You are only required to stop being it. And when you do, you will see that it never had any power of its own. It was you all along, giving life to a ghost through belief. The lesser self survives only because you have allowed it to. You have handed it your voice, your thoughts, your emotions, and so it breathes with your breath and moves with your will. But without your agreement, it cannot live. Every time you say, "I can't," you give it shape. Every time you say, "I'll try," instead of "I am," you feed its illusion. Every time you imagine failure or delay, you dress that false version in your authority, and it begins to act as master when it was only ever a servant. It is not external conditions that make you weak. It is your inner dialogue about those conditions. It is not the world that decides your limitations. It is your assumption that the world has the power to limit you. The weak version of you thrives on your hesitation. It grows stronger each time you ask others for permission to act. It gains weight every time you wait for perfect timing. You have built this version not with brick and stone, but with thought and repetition. You have built it every time you rehearse defeat in your mind instead of triumph. And yet, the moment you stop rehearsing that identity, it begins to crumble. You may wonder why things do not change, even when you desire them to. But desire alone is not enough. Desire must be joined by decision, and decision is weakened the moment it is followed by doubt, the moment it is questioned by the very voice that speaks limitation. That voice is not some outside force. It is your own creative power misused. Every word you speak inwardly, every emotion you entertain, every image you accept as true, these are acts of creation. And when those acts are in service of fear, insecurity, and lack, then naturally, the version of you that is born from them will be one of weakness. This is not punishment, this is law. The law is always faithful. It gives form to what you persistently accept. So if you feel trapped in the version of yourself that falls short, look not to the world, but to the state you have been living in. Look at what you have assumed about yourself without question. You have been saying in so many ways, "This is just how I am," and so it continues to be. But imagine, if you had never spoken a single word of doubt, never thought once in terms of limitation, what version of you would exist today? That version is still available. It has not gone anywhere. It waits patiently for your attention. The only barrier is that you continue to empower the weaker self through casual acceptance, through careless repetition, through stories you tell yourself that are no longer worthy of you. You have told yourself, "I have always been like this," but even that is a creation. You are not a fixed pattern. You are fluid consciousness, able to shift form the moment you withdraw power from the old and place it upon the new. But power must be focused. It cannot be split between who you wish to be and who you keep identifying as. You cannot serve both the vision and the memory. One must go. So stop feeding the self that hesitates. Speak only of what is noble, strong, certain. Think only from the state of the version of you who already lives the life you desire. Walk as that one. Feel as that one. Move as that one. And the weak version, deprived of attention, deprived of emotion, deprived of your belief, will dissolve not with resistance, but with silence. It will vanish like a mist the moment you no longer give it sunlight. The creative force that built the weak self is the same power that can build the great one, but you must no longer offer that power to stories of lack. Speak only of what you desire to be, and your inner world will respond. The old version does not need to be fought. It only needs to be forgotten. Let your attention be the altar, and let only your highest self be worshipped there. To step into the fullness of who you truly are, you must be willing to let something die, but not in the way the world thinks of death, not with pain or mourning, not with force or resistance. You are not required to wrestle the old self into submission. You need only to stop sustaining it. The weak version of you does not require a violent end. It dissolves the moment you stop recognizing it as yourself. Destruction here is not destruction of flesh, it is destruction of belief, and it is only by releasing that which is false that you can rise into what is real. No new version of you can exist while the old one still rules your consciousness. The seed must fall into the ground and be forgotten before it can rise anew. You cannot carry both the weight of the old and the vision of the new. To rise, you must allow something to fall. You must choose one self-image and abandon the other. This is not punishment, it is transformation. Fire burns away only what cannot remain. The ashes are not to be feared. They are proof that what was false has been removed. Many desire change, but few are willing to die to what they have always been. They pray for a better future while clinging to the habits of the past. They affirm new things with their lips while denying them in feeling. They long for light, but refuse to leave the cave. And so the weak self lingers, not because it is strong, but because it is familiar. But familiarity is not truth. Just because you have lived in fear does not mean fear belongs to you. Just because you have hesitated does not mean you are meant to doubt. What you do consistently becomes your identity, but it is not your origin. You can act small without being small. You can live with delay without being denied. But to shift your experience, you must put to rest the old performance. You must be willing to turn away from the comfort of that false costume and stand unclothed in the power of a new assumption. The lesser version of you will not die with noise. It dies in silence. It dies when you stop reacting to what it says. When it tells you you're not good enough and you no longer respond. When it whispers that you'll fail and you no longer listen. When it stirs anxiety in your chest and you let it pass without owning it. That's how the old version dies. Not with effort, but with indifference. The moment you declare, "I am new," the old begins to vanish. The moment you assume the state of your higher self and refuse to shift back, you are reborn. You do not need years of effort. You need only a sustained shift in awareness. That is the death of the weak self, the quiet, confident, final refusal to live from that place any longer. The world outside may not yet reflect your transformation, but that is of no concern. The change is not in the mirror, it is in the eyes looking into it. Let others speak of who you were. You no longer recognize that version. Let memory knock at your door. You do not answer. Let fear call your name. You do not turn. You are rising. And with each breath, you bury the version that once ruled you through doubt. This is the holy fire. This is the sacred death, not one of pain, but one of clarity. You die to the shadow and awaken as the light. And once the light has come, there is no need to fear the darkness again. The destruction of the old self is not loss, it is liberation, and from that silent letting go, your true life begins. You are not what the world says you are. You are what you accept as true of yourself. The version you live out each day is not imposed upon you. It is chosen. And whether that choice was conscious or unconscious, deliberate or conditioned, it remains a choice. The weak version you have worn like a garment is not permanent. It is only the result of what you have identified with. And identity is not fixed. It bends to your assumption. The moment you dare to say, "This is who I am now," the world must yield to that decision, to that. You are free. Not in some distant future, not after you prove yourself. You are free now to assume a new state, to think from a new place, to walk as someone entirely different. But many hesitate at the door of change because they think identity is earned. It is not. It is claimed. And that claim is not validated by evidence. It creates the evidence. It is not the world that assigns your identity. It only reflects the one you have chosen in secret. All your life, you've been told, this is just how you are. They pointed to your habits, your reactions, your past, and said, this is who you are. And you believed them. Not because it was true, but because no one ever told you that you could disagree, that you could rise and say, no, that is not me. That was a passing state, not a permanent self. And so the identity of weakness continued, not because it was true, but because you identified with it. You wore it like skin. You called it me, but it was never you. It was simply a state, one of many, that you lingered in too long. A state that became a story, and then a pattern, and then a personality. But at its root, it was always an assumption. Now you are awakening. Now you see, the power was never in the condition. It was in the concept of self you carried through the condition. And that concept is yours to change. At any moment, you may revise the I am that governs your life. You are not what you do. You are not what you've done. You are not what others believe. You are what you consent to imagine yourself to be. So let the old self fall away, not through effort but through disidentification. Stop calling yourself by names that belong to your past. Stop repeating phrases that hold you in place. Every time you say, I'm not that kind of person, you are building walls around your future. Tear them down with a simple truth. I am what I say I am, and no one else can say it for me. When you think, you are defining yourself. When you feel, you are embodying yourself. When you imagine, you are projecting yourself. In every moment, you are selecting from the infinite, and the self you choose becomes your world. If you choose to remain the lesser version, the world will mirror that back to you. But if you choose to be new, without apology, without waiting, without needing proof, then even the world must adjust. You are not bound by history. You are not trapped in personality. You are not the product of your past. You are the product of your present assumption, and that assumption can change in a breath. You can walk away from who you've been simply by refusing to carry it forward. So take up the self that reflects your desire. Not someday, now. Think from that self. Feel as that self. Walk as that self. And all that belongs to it will appear, for the world must match the man who no longer doubts who he is. Identity is not found. It is chosen. And in that choice, destiny takes shape. Imagination is not idle. It is not a daydream. It is the very substance of reality. What you imagine with feeling, with certainty, with repetition, that is what becomes your life. and the weak version of you that you so desperately wish to outgrow was imagined into being. You fed it with quiet inner conversations. You clothed it in moods. You breathed life into it through fear and repetition. Not because you wished it to live, but because you were unaware of your power. The version of you that doubts, that delays, that backs away when vision calls, it exists because you have allowed it to exist in the unseen realm of your imagination. You may not have said, "I want to be weak," but you accepted images of defeat. You entertained thoughts of limitation. You felt small, and you imagined from that smallness. And because imagination is the creative force, it had no choice but to bring forth a world that confirmed the very state you inhabited within. But here is the truth. If imagination built the weak version, then imagination can just as easily destroy it. And more than destroy, it can replace it, not by fighting it, not by fixing it, but by simply refusing to imagine from it again. You must now see imagination as your divine instrument, the place where reality begins. No matter how firm the facts around you seem, they are echoes of a former state, born of an older image. They cannot survive long if you stop giving them new life. If you desire strength, then you must imagine from strength. Not one day, not in theory, but now. This is not about pretending, it is about assuming. It is about closing your eyes and seeing what you desire as if it were already done, and then walking into the world from that vision, not as a hope, but as a fact. The world may not respond immediately, but it must respond, for imagination creates patterns the world is compelled to follow. When you imagine yourself weak, you step into a role. You think, feel, and act in accordance with that image. You expect rejection, and so you shy away. You expect failure, and so you never begin. You expect confusion, and so clarity never comes. But if you shift the image, if you dare to imagine yourself already standing firm, already acting boldly, already being received with favor, then everything changes, not because the world changed first, but because you did. You are not waiting on life. Life is waiting on you. It stands ready to mirror your inner state with perfect faithfulness. Imagination is not something you use only in quiet moments. It is always active. The only question is, what image are you living from? For if you continue to hold the picture of the lesser self, then no matter how many steps you take in the outer world, they will lead you back to the same result. But if you begin within, if you change the image, revise the inner script, and dwell in the feeling of the new version, then all that once seemed fixed will begin to shift. The world has no power to resist the one who imagines consistently from the end. The weak self is undone not by force, but by vision. It cannot stand in the light of your true self, fully assumed, fully felt. It vanishes like a shadow at noon. So stop rehearsing the old and begin to imagine the new, not vaguely, not passively, but with deep conviction. Close your eyes and see yourself as already free, already strong, already living as you were meant to live. Let that image burn in your heart until it becomes more real than your past. And the world, obedient to imagination, will bend itself to match. You imagined yourself small. Now imagine yourself great, and the weak self will be no more. Do not wait. Do not look for signs or seek approval from the outer world before you dare to become who you truly are. The version of you that hesitates, that says, "I need proof first," is the very self you must leave behind. You must act now, not because the world has changed, but because you have changed. When you assume the higher state and walk in it, even while the outer world still reflects the old, you show faith in your own power. And that faith is the cause. The change is the effect. The lesser self lives in delay. It waits. It negotiates with fear. It tells itself, "Not yet. Maybe when things are better. Maybe when the conditions are right." But those conditions will never appear until you declare that they already exist within. There is no perfect moment ahead. The only perfect moment is now, the moment you dare to claim that you already are what you desire to be. When you wait for the world to change before you do, you place the power outside of yourself. You hand over your authority to circumstances, people, time, and in doing so, you strengthen the very version of yourself that must be released. But when you declare that you are already the new self, even before the mirror reflects it, you align with the unseen truth, and the mirror has no choice but to follow. Nothing changes on the outside until something changes on the inside. That is the law. And the change within does not come from hoping or wishing, it comes from being, from walking, speaking, feeling, and responding from the state of the one you choose to be. And every time you act from that new state, even if the world is unchanged, you are impressing it more deeply into your reality. The weak self wants guarantees. It wants to see first and then believe. But belief is not a response, it is a creative act. You believe, and then you see. You assume, and then the world confirms. You live from the end, and then the path appears. So long as you wait for signs before you act, you are still bound to the old self. But when you act without hesitation, when you make choices from the place where your desire is already fulfilled, the old self begins to die. You must not just think of the new version of yourself, you must think from it. That shift is everything. It means you do not look around and ask, is it working? You do not analyze results, you become the result. You do not wait for evidence, you are the evidence. And that silent decision becomes the foundation upon which your new world is built. Your inner world is not a rehearsal. It is not preparation. It is the seed. It is the origin. And when you plant a seed, you do not return to check if it has bloomed in the next hour. You know it is growing, even when unseen. So too must you move as the new self, with unwavering inner certainty, knowing the world will follow, even if it must be dragged into your vision. There is no power in waiting. The power is in claiming now. And the more you delay, the more you affirm the version of yourself that was never meant to rule you. Kill that version by no longer living as it would live. Do not speak as it would speak. Do not choose as it would choose. Replace hesitation with decisiveness, doubt with knowing, fear with love. Begin before anything tells you to. Begin before it feels comfortable. Begin even if your hands tremble and the world looks the same. For when you begin from the end, when you move with inner assurance that the change is already complete, you release the need for outer permission. And in that moment, the weak self loses its grip, not because you fought it, but because you no longer needed it. You stepped forward without it, and it had no choice but to disappear. What you persistently think and feel within yourself becomes the form of your life. There is no mystery in this. The world around you is not random. It is ordered and shaped by the seeds you plant within. And your thoughts are not empty. Each one is a living seed filled with creative power, silently taking root in the unseen before appearing in the seen. And what you plant with emotion and repetition becomes inevitable. It becomes your experience, your habits, your circumstances, and yes, even the version of yourself you think you are. You cannot think weakly and live powerfully. You cannot dwell in fear and manifest courage. You cannot repeat inner conversations of failure and expect to live a life of triumph. That would violate the law of life. What is impressed must be expressed. And so, if your inner garden is filled with worry, self-doubt, hesitation, and guilt, then the outer world must echo that back to you, not as punishment, but as reflection. Each day, you are cultivating something. Even in your silence, you are planting. Every inner argument, every quiet complaint, every anxious imagination is a seed. And the soil of your subconscious does not reject what you give it. It accepts all that is given with feeling and persistence. It does not ask if the seed is noble or lowly. It only grows what is planted. So if you wonder why the same patterns appear again and again, look not to the world for answers. Look within and ask, what have I been feeding my mind? The weak version of you thrives in a mind that accepts weeds, in a mind that lets any thought grow without question, in a mind that entertains the past more than the future, that repeats old pain more than it imagines new joy. But that version of you is not permanent. It is not your fate. It is simply the result of past sowing. And the moment you begin to tend to your thoughts with intention, you begin to uproot the old and plant the new. Choose your thoughts as you would choose your words before a king. Do not let them wander, let them serve. When doubt speaks, do not answer. When fear knocks, do not open. When the old voice says, "You are not enough," smile quietly and sow something new. I am more than enough. I am chosen. I am powerful. I am ready. Not because you see the proof, but because you are now planting it. You do not need to know how the new thoughts will bloom. You only need to persist. Water them with emotion. Feed them with repetition. Guard them from contradiction. And you will see the world will begin to change. Slowly at first, and then all at once. Because the world has no choice but to reflect your dominant inner state. You are the gardener. You have always been the gardener. And the harvest you live is the result of the thoughts you've tended to most. If you do not like the fruit, do not curse the soil. Simply change the seed. Speak differently. Feel differently. Think as the version of you who no longer doubts. And as you persist, the weak self fades, not by force, but by being ignored. It has no strength on its own. Its only food is your attention. So starve it. Stop feeding it with worry. Stop affirming its story. Stop rehearsing its lines. And begin, even quietly, to sow a new self with every thought. The one who thinks in courage. The one who feels with certainty. The one who sees the end in the beginning. This version is not far. It is here, waiting for you to plant it deeply enough to grow. And once planted, it will rise, and nothing shall stop it. You must starve the self you no longer wish to be, not through resistance, not through hatred, but through sacred neglect. The version of you that feels small, uncertain, hesitant, anxious, it cannot survive without your attention. It draws its life from your focus. It breathes through your repetition. It lives because you keep feeding it with inner conversations that agree with its limitations. But once you withdraw your recognition, once you stop calling its voice your own, it begins to dissolve. Starvation is not struggle. It is silence. It is stillness. It is the quiet refusal to continue identifying with the old patterns. You do not need to defeat the weak self. You need only to ignore it. Every time you react as the old self would, you offer it one more breath. But when you remain unmoved, when you choose not to speak its language, not to think its thoughts, not to feel its familiar emotions, then its grip begins to loosen. You are not required to fix what is false. You are only required to stop affirming it. The lesser self is not a being. It is a pattern. It is a repeated loop that you've played so often, you've mistaken it for identity. But the moment you break the cycle of attention, the moment you turn your focus elsewhere, the loop falters. It cannot continue without your consent. So stop saying the words it wants you to say. Stop repeating its tired excuses. Stop stepping back into its memories. Speak now from the place of power. Begin to say, I no longer feel the need to explain my limitations. I no longer define myself by what I used to fear. I no longer entertain what does not serve my higher vision. And in these quiet declarations, you reclaim your energy. You bring your awareness back to the throne where it belongs. Let your attention become sacred. Let it serve only what you want to grow. Do not waste it on versions of you that belong to the past. Every time you think from the old self, you create a delay. You tell the world, this is still who I am, and so the world agrees. But when you no longer respond from that place, when you pause, breathe, and remember your chosen identity, you begin to starve the story that once defined you. Do not worry about the outer world when it reflects the old. That is just momentum fading. Let it pass. You do not water dead plants, so do not water old beliefs. When they rise, watch them without feeding them. You do not need to fight. You only need to refuse to nourish them with feeling. Without feeling, they are hollow, and in time they fall away like shadows at sunset. This is the true discipline, not of the body, but of attention, to guard your inner world with such care that only the noble is allowed to grow, to become so loyal to your highest vision that everything else withers for lack of care. You do not need to destroy the weak self. You need only to forget it. And forgetting comes through starvation. No more words, no more reactions, no more permission to live within you. Give your inner life to the version that walks boldly, speaks clearly, chooses confidently. Think as that self, feel as that self. Starve the noise and it will quiet. Starve the lie and it will vanish. You are not fighting the old, you are feeding the new. And whatever you feed becomes your reality. So feed only the self you desire to see rise, and watch all else fall away without a trace. The stronger self is not a stranger to you. It is not something you must travel toward, nor a distant future self waiting to arrive. It is here now, within you, buried not by time or fate, but by your attention to everything that it is not. You have mistaken silence for absence, and in doing so, you've reached outward when the treasure has always been inward. The strong, confident, clear, fearless version of you was never created. It was never born. It always was. You simply forgot. You forgot when you looked to others for approval. You forgot when you made fear your companion. You forgot when you assumed failure before even beginning. But forgetting is not loss. It is only a temporary misplacement of attention. And what is forgotten can be remembered in an instant. The moment you decide that strength belongs to you, that clarity is your nature, that purpose is already within you, the stronger self begins to rise, not because it has changed, but because you have turned toward it. There is nothing to build, there is nothing to create, there is only recognition. The same way the sun does not need to fight through the clouds, it only needs the clouds to pass. Your higher self does not need to be constructed. It needs the false image of weakness to be released, and that release is not an effort. It is a surrender to the truth you've always known deep within. You are more than the story you've accepted. The strong self does not scream. It does not demand. It waits in stillness for your return, and it returns the moment you stop telling the story of why you can't, the moment you stop defending your limitation, the moment you stop measuring your worth by the reflection of the world, for the world only ever reflects what you first assume to be true. Assumption is the bridge to remembrance. When you assume yourself to be strong, even in the face of fear, you begin to remember your true nature. You walk not because the ground is already firm, but because you know it will appear beneath your feet. You speak not because everyone listens, but because your voice is no longer shaken by silence. You move forward, not because the old version has disappeared, but because it no longer commands your belief. The moment you imagine the strong self and choose to think from that state, you resurrect it. You bring it back to the center of your awareness, and all else that you once called you begins to fade, not by force, but by neglect. You stop playing roles that never belong to you. You stop repeating words that weaken your foundation. You stop acting as if life is happening to you, and begin to live as though life is flowing from you. You do not need to do more. You need only to remember more truly, to look inward and say, that strength is mine, that power is me, that light, that calm, that certainty. It has never left me. I simply turned away. And now you turn back, not with effort, but with decision, not with force, but with stillness. And in that turning, everything begins to align. The stronger self has always been present, not just in potential, but in reality. It is not a dream. It is not an ideal. It is the real you, waiting behind every excuse, every doubt, every delay. And the moment you say, I remember who I am, the false must fall. The illusion fades. The clouds part. And what you thought you had to find, you realize you had all along. Transformation is not the result of chance, nor the gift of effort alone. It is the fruit of sustained awareness. The life you live, the version of yourself you walk in daily, is not held in place by fate, but by what you continually accept as true of yourself. A single thought may flash and fade, but the thoughts you revisit, the ones you return to like an old friend, become the structure of your identity. And identity is destiny. You do not become the new version of yourself through occasional imagination or brief moments of belief. You become it through unwavering recognition, by dwelling day after day in the state of the one you have chosen to be. You must not simply visit the new self like a traveler passing through. You must live there. You must set up your home within that assumption and let every thought, every decision, every reaction flow from it. The weak self falls, not because you hated it, nor because you resisted it. It falls because you stopped giving it a place to live. You no longer sustained it. You withdrew your loyalty from it and gave that loyalty to the truth of who you now choose to be. And in that act, quiet but powerful, the old began to unravel. For it was never held together by truth. It was held together by your constant attention. Awareness is not a passive state. It is an act of creation. What you are aware of being becomes the lens through which all else is seen. If you remain aware of being limited, unworthy, afraid, or unprepared, then all your actions will unconsciously reflect that state. But if you remain aware of being strong, clear, worthy, chosen, then your world must rearrange itself to fit that inner posture. The world is obedient, not to who you wish you were, but to who you refuse to stop being in imagination. There will be moments where the old self will attempt to return, not because it has power, but because you once lived in it for so long that its voice still echoes in memory. But memory is not law, and you are not bound to repeat what you no longer claim. When that voice speaks, do not argue, simply remain still. Return your attention to the new self and stay there. Do not shift because the outside has not yet changed. Do not let appearance deceive you. The outer is always the last to know what has already changed within. Your transformation is guaranteed when your awareness is unwavering, not perfect, but persistent. When you fall, you return. When you doubt, you remember. When you fear, you assume the feeling of courage once again. And each return makes the new state stronger, firmer, more natural. Until one day you wake and realize that the old self has become a stranger to you. You cannot even recall its voice, because it has starved in the silence of your detachment, and the new self has been sustained in the light of your loyalty. So make no more bargains with the past. Make no more excuses for delay. Do not dip in and out of your chosen identity. Remain, abide, sustain. For it is in the staying, in the daily recognition, that the imagined becomes actual, the invisible becomes visible, and the new self becomes not a vision, but your lived reality. Awareness, consistent, focused, unshaken, is the only transformation you ever need. And once held, it will reshape all that you are. You have seen now, clearly and without confusion, that the only thing standing between who you are and who you desire to be is the version of yourself you continue to keep alive through attention, repetition, and belief. The weak self, the hesitant self, the doubting self, it has no power of its own. It draws every ounce of life from you, and in truth, it was never you. It was a mask, a habit, a series of old assumptions wrapped around your true nature. But no longer must you serve what no longer serves you. You were never meant to remain small. You were never meant to survive when you were born to create, to rule, to live from the inner kingdom where all things are possible. You now know the weak self was imagined, and what was imagined can be reimagined. It was chosen, and what was chosen can be changed. It was believed, and what was believed can be denied. Every point has brought you back to the same truth, that you are the center of all change, the source of all transformation, the one who must die to the old and rise in the new, not through struggle, but through conscious selection. And you select not just once, but continually, faithfully, persistently, until that new identity becomes the only one you know. You do not need permission to begin. You do not need to fix the past. You do not need the world to agree. You need only to assume and sustain, to live now as though it is already done, to think now as the one who has already arrived, to feel now as the one who no longer fears, no longer shrinks, no longer waits. You must no longer say, "I hope I can become," but instead, "I remember who I am." For that remembrance is the awakening. That remembrance is the end of the lie. That remembrance is the death of the weak self and the resurrection of the true. Let the world show what it will. Let circumstances appear unchanged. You are no longer reacting, you are creating. And what you now create from sustained inner knowing will soon break through the outer illusion like the dawn breaking through night.